And we are live. Danny Beasley, what's up?
Hey, how's it going, man?
Good to see you, dude. It's always good to see you. I always like talking to my CNC furniture provider here.
All right,
Still using it. Still using
good.
it. I'm always telling the story like, oh yeah, I was at Danny's wedding and he just gave it to me, you know. And I think Emilio Garcia, he owns like a graphic shop. He even to
Mhm.
the extent of saying, "Hey, I really like this," and I was like, "Oh, you can borrow it," or use it and see how it is. And he's taken it. He's never given it back since. And
I'm happy to give him the file too. He can go make his own.
one question I had was actually around OpenCC. Do you know OpenCC?
Uh,
Open.cc, OpenDesk.cc, I think
yeah,
it's
yeah,
called.
yeah. Open desk, yeah.
So I'm going into a new place soon
Uh huh.
myself, and I want to like maybe even like be only like my furniture be purely that.
Uh huh.
Do you know how it works? Because it seems like you can't really download the file effectively or like pay to download the file effectively, and it's really costly to just like get it ordered and made by someone. So like I just want to somehow get it made myself, right? Like how does that work?
Yeah. Actually, Jimmy, one of my former employees, students, was onboarding himself for that. So he was going through the process of doing that, and they actually in order for someone to get the files or become a fabricator that is hireable, they have to actually produce the thing, and I think send it to OpenDesk, or at least do some sort of validation verification on it. So they're actually kind of testing out the fit and finish of a manufacturer before they put them in their list. Um, so I think you could get
Okay.
the files by signing up as a fabricator,
Oh.
and then they would give you the files to kind of test it. But yeah, it's actually good that they're doing some sort of vetting process prior to encouraging you to pay someone else to produce it for you.
Okay. Good to know that workaround. I'm very fat. I've been always interested in OpenDesk.cc or just like furnishing an entire place with plywood based furniture.
Yeah,
It's really slick what they got. So I'm excited,
yeah.
and they have a wide range too. No
The thing to keep
mattress
in
yet, no
mind,
bed frame yet, but it's
yeah. Well, the thing to keep in mind about their designs is that they are very pretty. They make them look nice,
mm,
but that makes them much harder to fabricate. Requires a higher skill level, and there's a lot more pieces. So from my brain looks at it and says there's 50 ways I could simplify this to make it easier, but that's not necessarily the lens they look at it from.
yes. Good to know. Good to know. So we got here Bernie Hyde and Eric Shee, alumni from our 2018-2020 program.
All right.
Give us a little introduction, Bernie and Eric, and maybe you can share a little bit of why you're
Hey,
interested in this one as well.
yeah, okay. I'll start. My name is Bernard. I'm 19. Uh, as Derek stated, was a part of the 2019 or 2018 Pilot City program. I worked with him on drone projects, what we had going on at the time, and I'm interested in this one because I I'm all for helping the community and stuff, and it seems like this one's I can't really tell what's going on either, just by reading the description, which is another reason why I wanted to join, is just learn a bit more about it and see if I can just learn something. But I see that you're trying to help people with the pandemic and stuff, and I tried to look you up, couldn't really find much, but I just wanted to tune in and get the firsthand you know rundown on what's actually going down here.
Cool.
Yeah, I guess I'll go next. My name's Eric. I'm currently 15. I was part of the 2020 program of Pilot City. I worked with Kaiser Permanente creating like a supplement dispenser for them. And the
Yep.
reason why I was really interested in this one is because I love making stuff. I like maker spaces and stuff like that. I go to Irvington with Miss Bowie, and I've worked with her in her maker space and stuff like that. So I'm just really interested in hearing like what kind of stuff you do, and I'm also really interested in how you're trying to help the community. So I also wanted just to hear it firsthand.
Cool. And I remember your project. Derek sent it to me. I think beginning of the pandemic. We were looking for ways to provide some assistance, and I was really intrigued by your particular project of the vitamin dispenser.
All right, that's so cool.
He even has background on your project. So Danny, we know each other because I forgot how we met each other, but we somehow met each other and discovered that you build maker spaces. And we had a contract with Hayward Unified at the time, and we had you build a makerspace. And we had some other stuff going on in Stanley and Unified, and we wanted you to kind of support that, and just to even know that there's a guy out there, right, that can assemble, an environment, for particularly schools, it seems like, right, to have the capacity to have their students be able to make things, right, whether it be a project, whether it be entrepreneurial endeavor, whether it be a knickknack, whether it be Mother's Day gift, or whatnot, right, to have an access to a resource like what you build is very interesting. So give us a little background on how you got to that point. I don't even think I know this story, right? Take us from high school onward, go a little deep. We want to see what your career path's been like too.
Well, it starts prior to high school. Let's see. I grew up life as a carpenter, essentially. My grandfather was a stonemason. My dad was a general contractor. We moved to the desert when I was in 4th grade because they had no building department. So it was really easy for my dad to do building. And probably starting around 10 years old, I was out on the construction site with him working. My first job was digging a ditch. I remember explicitly the very first job and the very first ditch I had to dig and how horrible of a job I did at doing that. I think I still got paid though, but I got paid like $5 for a day's worth of back-breaking labor. So not really much. But that summer ended up being a typical summer for me for roughly the next 8 years of my life. So every summer I was out going and building houses, as well as building swimming pools because my dad started doing that too. And by the time I had graduated high school, I was a journeyman carpenter. I just had that much skill level. I was running jobs. I was the responsible person on site running jobs, dealing with subcontractors, doing materials ordering, materials runs, etc. In addition to that, I also spent 2.5 years working inside of a hardware store where my mom was in charge of HR. So that was an easier job to get as well. But I worked inside of a hardware store for 2.5 years during high school. I was lucky. I had 2 years of my high school. I only had to do like half days. So I pretty much worked full time from roughly about 16 onward. And the few years inside of a hardware store is huge. It has been a huge beneficial experience for my life. I was in charge of dealing with tools, so I got to learn everything about tools. And this was back in the day where pretty much everyone who worked in there was a retired old guy who had been doing it for 40, 50 years. So I got access to tons of knowledge around tools, but also hardware. I was in charge of stocking the nuts and bolts aisle. So I had to know every little thing. I had to know the names of different kinds of screws, fasteners, attachments, nuts, etc. I continued forward, moved away from my hometown, which was about an hour outside of Las Vegas. Swore off construction for the rest of my life and said, I'm never going to do that again. I don't want to touch this stuff again. I'm done. But I then worked at another hardware store and then ended up leaving Las Vegas area to move to the Bay Area back in 2002 or 2003, something like that. And when I moved here, I kind of kept that ideology of, hey, I'm going to swear off the construction industry. I'm not interested in swinging a hammer, getting dirty, working super hard, all that kind of stuff. But I had no other educational background at the time. So getting the jobs that were immediately available to me, at least a person who didn't figure out how to be very scrappy, there were very few jobs available to me that I had any interest in. And then one day I applied for a job in construction as a carpenter just because it was there and I wasn't finding anything else. And, got hired essentially on the spot, got a phone call within 24 hours, got hired on the spot, primarily because I had a deep background in construction already, even though I was very young. My first job, I went from $15 an hour, which is what the max I was making in Las Vegas, both hardware store and construction work. And the first job I got, I cringed and I said, when they said, oh, what's your rate? And I cringed and I said, $25 an hour. And the person jumped off the phone and said, can you start tomorrow? So what I quickly realized is that skill that I entered with, that I was really not trying to use, was valuable in the marketplace. And in fact, it was so valuable that I nearly doubled my pay rate, and that still wasn't on par with what it was worth here. And that's what I discovered over time. But I jumped into a construction job. I met a couple of other guys on that job. The three of us went off and started our own general contracting firm. I'm not one to sit still for too long. So I did that for about 7-8 months until I went off to go start my own company with these other guys. That failed miserably in about 6 different ways. But that's really what I encourage most people to do, is go step in and fail over and over, because that's where your greatest lessons are coming from. So don't be afraid to kind of dive in. And then I ended up forming another partnership with a different partner about 4 years later, doing construction remodeling stuff. And then it was shortly after that I got an opportunity. Well, I started pursuing green building at that time. So it was a brand new topic. It didn't really exist. I fought against structured education for most of my life, but I was at a time in life that said, if there was a program that actually existed, I found something that I had enough interest in that I would have pursued it, except for it didn't exist. There was no green building programs. There was no degrees, certificates, anything you can get in any kind of a structured educational environment. So I went off and I essentially created my own degree. I went to a variety of other training organizations. Green building was a new topic. It was getting a little hot. So I went to a bunch of private training organizations and started taking all the education I could, just so I could learn about kind of the background of the work that I have deep knowledge in already. But now it's understanding the materials and the process and the energy that goes into the making of the stuff and the performance of the building in the first place. All these things that are just totally glossed over when you're learning how to swing a hammer only. Eventually that knowledge did get me another job, although I went from $37 an hour as a carpenter to like $22 an hour, because I went to go work for a startup called Green Building Exchange. And it was because I had this self-knowledge and self-education in green building that I was qualified for the job in the first place. And it was in Redwood City, and it was there to kind of pull together and corral the whole industry. So trying to put all the services under one roof. So both from services and products and other things like that. I spent about 2 years with this company. It went bankrupt. It never really had a successful model, but it quickly took me and put me into a brand new work environment, away from getting dirty, swinging a hammer, and more in an office. But it was also building a business, building a startup, building something from the ground up, and trying to define something that's totally nebulous. We have an idea, and we started with an idea, and then I had to continue to move forward on that every day. I was initially hired to do sales. So my job was to go sell the product, the product companies and the contractors to come in and rent space, which it was not something that I was comfortable selling, because I didn't think the product was worth it that we're selling them. But yeah. What I was able to do was be flexible, because they said, well, I can't create the value for you here, but let me show you what value I can create for you elsewhere. And so relatively quickly, I became kind of the frontman and the spokesperson for the organization. It was my job to then go network and go rub elbows with other people to get people to know about it. So for 2 years nearly, I was essentially just on the circuit, going to the green building parties and the trainings and the meetups, and there was Eco Tuesday and green drinks. And there's all these other things that were coming up to bring people together in this industry. And so I went very quickly and became the representative of the organization. I brought in multiple training partners. So I was also in charge of education. So it was my job to bring in all of the professional education and use our venue as a host for this stuff. One of the great byproducts of that is then I got all of that education for free, because I was the host. So I got to sit in on all that stuff and get more education. And the number one thing I'll recommend to everyone is identify the best way where people will pay you to educate yourself. There's lots of opportunities for that. You should not have to pay to get educated, because there will be people who will pay you to educate yourself. And you should really, really look for those opportunities, because they exist. And I ended up leaving that company. This is where we're getting one step closer to the work I do today. Towards the end of leaving that company, I was brought on to a panel discussion at a big green building conference. And then I met some other folks from a company at the time called Geo Sherpa. And in essence, they were using an extreme level of technology in building houses. So they're using high-end, giant CNC timber machines that are cutting up sticks that you then assemble as Lincoln logs. They're using augmented reality. This was 15, 16 years ago. They're using virtual reality. They're integrating those tools into the workflow of building a house. And I ended up coming on as an unpaid partner, joined another startup essentially, but coming on as an unpaid partner to be the person who has kind of the green building knowledge and a lot of project management experience. And so I did that for a number of years. It never put money directly in my pocket, but it introduced me to Frank Gehry, who's a world famous architect. We were invited down.
You got in touch with Frank Gehry?
Oh, we were invited to his office to go talk to him about building his personal house.
Ooh, that's exciting.
So although I felt like a fraud because I showed up with a suit, and I've worn a suit like 2 days of my life previous to that experience, and I'll probably never do it again. It just took me outside of my comfort bubble and tried to make myself look and feel like other people rather than like myself.
Right.
But we also talked to NASA. We were talking about the Uber Green project NASA was doing in Mountain View, and a variety of others. And so the greatest value that it brought me was, one, some lifelong friendships that I got out of the deal. But early on in my career, it introduced me to a whole different way of thinking, a whole different way of building, etc. And so once I started really diving into that, I ended up having to go find some other work opportunities, and found myself working for Laney College. They opened up the door, or I went to go sell them some educational offerings from a different company I was repping from Germany. And what I didn't know at the time is that they would never, ever buy it. But I didn't know that. But what I discovered in there is that they definitely had an interest in the content and they wanted to grow in that area. And they ended up asking me if I wanted to come teach, if I wanted to be faculty. And this was right when Obama first stepped into office. The idea of green jobs was this kind of new idea that was getting lots of funding, and they actually needed competent instructors to come in and teach the stuff. I politely declined when I was there and said no, but a month later things changed for me, and I hit them up and said, hey, I'd like to follow up on this if this was a serious offer. Let's talk about it. And they said, sure, send over a resume. Let's get started. I sent over a resume. They forwarded it to the guy who runs the HVAC department. And he called me up and said, I'm looking at your resume. Everything looks awesome here, except for you forgot to put your college on here. And I said, I didn't forget. I don't have it. And he said, well, unfortunately, because you don't have that, you can't teach here. Which was dumb because if he didn't see that one little piece missing from the resume, everything else looked perfect on paper. I was ready to go teach the program, but I didn't have the college education. So, but that ended up opening up the door to Laney College. They said, we can't hire you, but maybe there's something else we can do. Pushed me over to the carpentry department, which is a place where I was much more comfortable with. And then they ended up hiring me as a student technician. I had to enroll in school, but I saw this as a career change opportunity, a foot in a new door. I once again took another large pay cut, went off to go make like 12, 13 bucks an hour for it's 3 months. And I clearly stated, it says, I'm here to prove myself. And after 3 months, I need you to turn around and value me for what I'm worth. But I will show up and I will show that I'm worth it first. And I did that, and then within 3 months, I got moved over to a contractor, which equated to a pay raise. And my contracting rate for Laney now is I went from 12 bucks to 87 bucks an hour, and this is roughly over 10 years. So it's a long period of time, but without any new structured education, I was able to make that jump in compensation. But in addition to that, I was also getting lots of new free education. So once again, I was getting paid to educate myself. And then after a number of years of doing that, it was no longer really satisfying my soul. I wasn't getting the satisfaction I wanted out of it. And I kind of took my previous knowledge of automated construction and said, you know what we're really missing is we're dealing with a cart before the horse, or a chicken and egg scenario here, in that we can't have industry in this country, at least in this area, embrace these technologies and redesign our construction and building process unless we have skilled and trained talent that understand these technologies in the first place. And since there is no educational program teaching these things, it then became it became my mission at that point to make sure that we're preparing and putting people in that pipeline in the first place. And so it's taken the people who are interested in swinging a hammer, but also showing them how to 3D model, and then marrying those two skills up with the tangible physical understanding of fabrication and the virtual design side of it, that really makes someone a very valuable person. We have great opportunities for architects and designers in a lot of our four-year institutions, through architecture programs, through others that teach really good about design, that teach some of the tools and the software, but very rarely are you ever putting your hands physically on the things that you design. And it's my opinion that if you don't get to put your hands on the stuff, you're never going to actually learn. You're not going to learn from all the mistakes you made in that design, because you're just going to hand that file off to someone else whose job it is to make it. And they're going to be cursing you out left and right because you made lots of dumb decisions because you've never had to deal with those impacts yourself. So that really became my mission in life at that point. Was I want to prepare people effectively and give them both kind of access and exposure to the design side and the engineering side, but especially on the physical hands-on fabrication side. And today, I only do those things for fun. Like, rarely am I going off and making a bunch of cabinets on the CNC machine. I'm making, I made these little tray tables for my kids in our car on the laser cutter. Like, those are the kinds of things that I get to put my hands on, because now most of my time is now on talking and facilitating and convincing and creating a deal and putting together opportunities and seeing connections that others don't. Because I could do that for 25 hours a day and never get to touch a machine again, which is not what I want to do. But there's that much work on really just moving the industry forward.
I did not know you had a sales background. That's the most fascinating thing I got from that. But it makes sense too.
You'll notice it didn't make me much money, so don't dwell on that too much.
Well, I mean, first of all, you're an articulate individual. You speak from accuracy, right? And that's such a good person to have, to be building real things for real people.
Right. Yeah, and I'm able to sell things that I believe in. This work that I do is based out of passion. The change that I see that I can make for an individual by getting a facility up and running is what drives me. And so I can sell that day in, day out, because I understand the value that it's going to bring to other people. Selling this green building nebulous offering inside this building that 3 people visit a day was a really, really hard sell for me. And I didn't have enough passion there. But when it comes to the work I do today, I've got all the passion in the world, so I can go sell this. I can go sell it to anybody.
That's phenomenal. Okay. Thank you for that story. That
Sure.
was a really interesting journey, especially with not having a college degree as well, and then pursuing working for a college. That was probably the differentiation of why they weren't able to get you on, right? They don't want to promote, don't get a college education at all. But now what's interesting is that we've really seen a huge, change in people's understanding of whether college is necessary or not, right? So essentially it's ended up working your way anyways, right? When it comes to
just took a long time to get here, but the world is changing, and it's my opinion of college as a whole is it's not a bad thing. It's a lot better if you know what it is you want out of it.
Yes. So
if you want the content you're really passionate about and you want it, go head first. If you don't know what you want to do, you might end up wasting a lot of time. You may make great friends. You may discover what it is you want to do, but that's what it should be sold to you as, is a discovery moment, not as a pivotal moment that is going to go change your life.
And I think that's the difference what you're saying, right? It doesn't matter about whether you have a college degree or whether you've gotten this experience or this skill set. It's about discovering what you love doing and allowing that to pave the path to find out what you're good at, to find out what the world needs, to find out what you get paid for, and connect it all in. So you eventually got to the point where you're in Laney College internally, you're in the system, right?
Mhm.
But then there's these new opportunities spurring up, where you're able to start to actually build their digital fabrication kind of capabilities, within the organization, and then you're able then kind of export that to different schools and jurisdictions.
Mhm.
So tell us about the Laney College Fab Lab development that you essentially designed, created for our
Sure.
students, and then go ahead and list some other Fab Labs you got going on that people should know of, that you also help build.
Sure. Yeah. So I think that the work that I've done with Laney to get the Fab Lab off the ground, I am not the only person who did the work. But without me, it wouldn't have ever gotten started. I was the glue that was holding it together, leaning on other people with other knowledge and with other backgrounds and knowledge of bureaucracies and systems. By the way, if you want to become an effective person, go figure out how to build and survive and create meaningful things with inside educational institutions. Because if you can solve that problem, you are a very, very good problem solver, because it is the most complex, so many interpersonal issues to deal with, so much bureaucracy, so much nepotism and things like that. So if you can get in and solve those problems in these crazy institutions, you got a hell of a lot of valuable skills there that you can use elsewhere. But that lab, it took me roughly about 3 years. It took me 3 years of time between, hey, I think this is a good idea and we should do it, to the doors are open. And so that 3-year timeline was, hey, I've got this knowledge. Let me come help other people understand it. And I was able to get a handful of the faculty on board, from wood technology, from architecture, from carpentry, and others that said, yes, we see there's enough value in this digital fabrication area, and we're happy to support you. But I had to go put together the presentations, that is pulling out the right data about the industry demand, that is showing what the skills are, that is showing how we can apply this across disciplines within the college. So I had to go paint the picture to say, hey, if we had this concentration on digital fabrication that could look like a fab lab as this tool that lives between departments, because it helps all these departments evolve in this new realm, then we're going to bring more value. And so 3 years of politicking, primarily, of presentations, of grant writing, of begging for money, of saying, hey, look at that over there. Isn't that interesting? I can help you get that if you do it this way. And so it was about 3 years of time to get that off the ground. But while I was kind of in mid-design, and this was not something that was adopted yet, and they said, yes, we're going to build this, I convinced someone at Castlemont High School to give me money instead. And so I sold him the vision of Fab Lab, and he said, yes, this sounds great. And they had some academy money, which basically meant they had a large pot of funds he could go tap into. He had an extra, $200,000, $300,000 every year to invest in building their academies. And so we were able to call the Fab Lab a part of their academy. And I think, the first purchase we got was $100,000 or something like that. And so I got $100,000 committed. Now, what I did with that lab is I donated almost all of my time, because this was the first example, and I kept referencing this wonderful thing that exists in many other places. It just doesn't exist here. And it's this nebulous facility that we can do these wonderful things, and it's got all these cool tools, and it'll help people, and it'll be really great. But it was just an idea. Even a video of another space doesn't sell it. And so I had to go physically build one. So with Castlemont, I took a back seat to paying myself, or took a very minimal amount of money, because I wanted all of the money they spent to be physically seen. I wanted them to see in the room, there's a $50,000 CNC machine, there's a $30,000 laser cutter, there's a $20,000 of other equipment, here's tables and things. And look, you spent, before we opened, we spent $170,000, and maybe 10 or 12 of that went in my pocket. But the rest of it was there, and I was able to demonstrate, look at this place. Now you see what I'm talking about. And that's what it took to convince Laney. And we had to bring the dean at Laney to Castlemont to the grand opening. And then, the next week I get a phone call from him and says, okay, I think it's, we better get moving on this thing now. And so I had to go off and create that. And my number one advice is go get dirty, go do things that nobody's asking you to do. Because those experiences are going to build up great opportunities for yourself. And that's what I had to do. I realized I had to go prove that I could build one of these things first. And then I had to show that it actually had value. Once I did, it then kind of established myself as the domain expert. I was able to build Laney College Lab, get that one open. I ran it for 2 years, and then but we staffed it, the whole thing. We staffed it with students. So I hired an existing student who was an adult who had a previous career that was just a new Laney College student taking machining and welding and other things like that. But was able to essentially train him up on this. Most of it was the politics. The politics is what takes the training and patience in dealing with bureaucracy. But I was able to train him up on running a facility, and then I handed it over to him. And I was able to step back from driving it. I was still involved, but I no longer had to deal with the day-to-day, because when I handed it off, I went off to go build other labs. And so I've worked with Derek and Hayward. We did a little bit of consulting work with San Leandro. I worked with Berkeley High School, worked with the architecture firm on their new fab lab that they've designed. I did a series of 5 labs in East Palo Alto in a collaboration with Google and Stanford. College of Alameda is my most recent one, the place that I'm the most proud of, although we have been able to operate for almost a year, which is scary. Yeah. But I was able to go off and sell this to other places. And in the meantime, I've also sold custom furniture. I've also done custom laser jobs. I helped go start a for-profit fab lab that my ex-business partner now operates on his own in downtown Oakland. And so I went off and did a lot of other things to support this kind of work. And now I'm really trying to focus on larger systems thinking, systems approaches, looking at workforce development as a whole. How do we engage students differently? Kind of using the knowledge that I gained in this particular domain and bring that in a more broad appeal.
So before we get into Fab City Bay Area, and before we give a characterization on Idea Builder Labs too, and I also know that Eric and Bernie, I'm kind of ignoring you too, but we're getting into some good meat and bones. So please hold your questions, and we'll answer it towards the end. And those who are watching, please type in your questions in the Q&A box too, so we can get those answered along the way. So let's step back a little bit. What is a Fab Lab, and what's in there, and who started that word? And give us a domain understanding of this space.
Yeah, you need the sales pitch on a Fab Lab. So Fab Lab stands for Fabrication Laboratory. The first official Fab Lab was started at MIT in 2001. So quite some time ago, they started the first one. They wrote a large grant to the National Science Foundation for a total of $10 million. With the $10 million, what they were proposing to do was they're proposing to bring together automated industrial equipment from a wide variety of different industries and put all of those machines in one room, or essentially in one space. That idea was innovative in itself, because they weren't necessarily inventing new machines or coming up with completely new ideas. They're just saying, hey, we're going to mix up industries, and we're going to mix up the tools of industry. And when you put a industrial sewing machine next to a laser cutter, you create new products, you create new ideas, new ways to hack those machines together to work using the laser cutter to cut out your fabric and then taking that over to the sewing machine to sew together. Now all of a sudden you're improving the workflow in the process. And that was their primary thesis, was we can't predict the outcomes, but we can predict we're going to have great outcomes because we're doing something that really nobody has done before. And that automated equipment is your CNC router, is your laser cutter, is your 3D printer, is your vinyl cutter. You want to have like an electronics lab. You want to have sewn goods, soft goods, textile lab area, 3D scanning, all these other tools. And you try to put as many of these cool tools in one place, and then you run people through it. At MIT, they created a program called How to Make Almost Anything. And what they do is they run students through machine by machine, and they walk in front of a machine and say, here's this machine. Here's what it does. Here's how it works. Here are the things you need to watch out for so you don't break it. Here's the way you need to design for it. Here's the software that goes into it. Here's the materials that you can use with the machine. Here's the scale at which it works with, etc. And they kind of go through the basics of all that with each machine. And they go from machine to machine, trying to embed that knowledge in the minds of students. And then from that point, they then at the very end of the course, they have a capstone project with a very, very basic assignment. And that assignment is make something. Nothing more detailed than that. But you now gave these people access to new machines, new knowledge, new software, new capabilities, and now you want to get out of the way of their learning. You want to just remove yourself and eliminate the expectations you have over what they're going to create, and let the student create whatever it is that's in their brain that came up when they said, oh, wait a minute, this machine, I can now take the part that comes out of this machine, I can move it over here, and I can now laser etch it, and I can customize that, and I can do something different. And that's really the ideology that they were looking to embed in people's minds, is new ways of being creative and problem solve, etc. Relatively quickly, I think within 2 years of building that first facility, MIT franchised the idea, and they franchised it out to third world countries. So there were like 3 or 4 labs in Africa that they received funding to go build. And the reason why their thesis for why they wanted to target third world countries is that when you bring in this level of technology and capacity into a place that has nothing or next to nothing, you get this dramatic leapfrog effect. So they can jump over all of the industry that didn't really ever get established or exist in their area and give them all of this brand new technology.
And there's science behind that type of leapfrogging at this point, I would assume.
Yeah. There's a lot of data between like how valuable that is and what it does for the people. But imagine, if you had your wheelbarrow bracket breaks from your wheelbarrow, and you're waiting 3 weeks for a part to get ordered. But now you've got access to welder. Not only have access to welder, you got access to water jet. So you could weld it and fix it yourself, or you could go use the water jet and go make the part that doesn't break. So that's the idea. Then that continued to franchise. They formed, it's called the Fab Foundation, which is the overarching organization that kind of oversees everything. Though they don't try to control anybody. They just exist as an organizing body. And there's 1,800 Fab Labs around the world right now that are officially in that network. There are lots and lots of spaces that exist that didn't use the label of Fab Lab. So you have a makerspace, you have an engineering lab, you've got an innovation lab, et cetera, all these other places that exist. But one of the unique things with Fab Labs, and this has really been something that I've adapted myself, but is I've labeled Fab Labs kind of specifically as spaces that have a focus on the high-tech tools and have a focus on the discipline of the tools. So when a makerspace, here's a bunch of cool stuff, go ahead and go have fun, go get some glitter glue and squirt it on a piece of fabric and be happy, which there's nothing wrong with that. But my interest has always been, I want to make sure I give people the tools to go make a living. I want to make sure that I inspire people and give them access to new knowledge that they didn't have before. And so really focusing on the discipline and the high-tech side of it, because you learn the high-tech side of it, you have a job tomorrow. If you learn the low-tech side of it, maybe you have a job. But if you learn the high-tech side of it, you're guaranteed to have a job, because that's what the world is using.
So before we go into some questions from Eric specifically, because he has class at 12:35, and that's fine. We're probably gonna go over, by the way, and Bernie, we can kind of yield to you towards the later part of the conversation. What's in a Fab Lab? What's in it? Just start spitballing. What do you got in there?
Sure. Laser cutters, CNC routers, multiple CNC routers typically, vinyl cutter. We've got embroidery machine. We've got industrial sewing machines. We've got a buttonhole machine at one of the labs. We have a dye sublimation printer, a very, very cool machine that just allows you to print on paper, and you put it inside of a heat press. You can transfer that ink onto almost anything. We've got a wood shop. We've got a basic metal shop. I've got 3D scanners. I have both handheld scanners now. I've got a big room scanner as well. Lots of power tools, lots of hand tools. We've got a electronics corner. There's a bunch of stuff set up for doing electronics. But I've gotten into some other machines that haven't taken off so much. We've got a CNC wire bender, which I was salivating over for the longest time and realized that I shouldn't have been. But
very nice.
We've got a UV printer, which allows you to smaller scale, but you can print literally on anything, full color print. Yeah, and a variety of other tools as well.
And media is starting to being part of that too, right? As we get into VR design, or as we get into, right?
Yeah, well, and like Yeah, so getting into looking at media for the purposes, of the VR design or AR design, etc. But also like that room scale 3D scanner that I have. I'm using that scanner to go scan new schools, and I get a full 3D model of the school before I start my job. I can export out a floor plan out of that then gives me all the design parameters that I need. But we're also looking at using that same 3D scanner for doing virtual tours or like open houses for different facilities for workforce, for educating people about what's out there. We're looking at doing a tour, like an architectural tour in Old Oakland. We're actually looking at getting a 3D video camera now for doing like a walking tour in Old Oakland for a project. So media is getting more and more overlaid in that, and and learning how to manipulate media is great, especially because you get good at Photoshop, you get good at Illustrator, and all of those skills apply directly towards using a laser cutter or a CNC machine. I use Illustrator all the time for designing stuff for the laser cutter or for the CNC. So having that knowledge, it transfers, and that's why I love getting someone into the lab and showing them how to use a vinyl cutter to make a basic sticker. It's not a complicated thing, but you make the sticker, it has your name on it, it makes you happy. And then it gives you incentive to go in and learn Adobe Illustrator, so that next time you can make that sticker that has a starburst around it, or you can remake your own, your own sports team's logo or whatever it may be. And so it serves as the incentive or the inspiration to get someone intrigued and interested in learning Illustrator. And I don't really care if you come back and make another sticker, or if you become a fabricator, because now you got hooked on software that applies to almost every industry in the world. And so now you've got a skill that's valuable, whether or not you choose to do anything about fabrication.
Yes, and there's certainly a lot of other methods of how, teaching people to do digital fabrication so that they can start to kind of absorb the skill. There's a lot more there, right, internally. So I want to defer to Eric and see if you have any particular questions, because he's actually just got a gig this summer to actually run Irvington High School's Fab Lab, basically, which is Miss Valley's facility. So, Eric, anything you're pondering on here?
Honestly, the main question I have is like, can I visit this space? Because it sounds so cool. And yeah, like this summer, I'm not gonna be running the Fab Lab. I'm just gonna be helping out, like trying to like teach a couple of students. Hopefully, fingers crossed, not set in stone yet, but that might happen there. And I believe also down in if you know Centerville Junior High down in Fremont, there I believe I took his class, Mr. Olson. He's a woodshop teacher, and he's also trying to make a Fab Lab within his classroom. And on like I don't know, it just sounds so cool to me. I really want to learn more about all of this stuff. I guess one of the main questions I have is like, how does someone like start learning this stuff? Do we just show up and start trying stuff and start learning from people there?
Well, in a non-pandemic time, that would be exactly the way it works. We literally, the doors are just open. We would actually, you didn't have to be a student. You can walk in the door for free, take a workshop on laser cutter, and get started. Unfortunately, those are not the times we live in today, and most of that stuff has been rescinded. But if all of this stuff is of interest, my role here with Derek in this project is to essentially serve as a mentor and advisor. And if these are things that you're getting involved in, then I could much more easily plug you into this stuff as we move forward. So it's a little bit more difficult to learn remotely, just because access is a primary thing, and I really want people to put their hands on stuff. That's how you learn the most, and that's how you learn the best typically. So it's a lot more difficult, but there's a lot of different things, and a lot of what I do is just identifying opportunities and challenges. And really, I encourage anybody, like, you want to get involved with this. Good, go identify a challenge. Go identify a problem that needs to get solved. And I like to apply that across the board. It's not just a physical problem that I can solve with a little widget that I make on a laser cutter. I'm looking at entire system scale things. But it was this power that I discovered early on, that I was able to really just take. I was able to really apply and say, wow, I can solve a problem. I have some tools and power to do so, and it's that seed that I'm trying to plant in everybody's brain. It's like you have the knowledge and the power and the wherewithal to solve problems. and I want you to solve a tiny one today, because then the one you solve tomorrow is going to be a little bit bigger, and the one you solve the next day is going to be a little bit bigger, and the one you solve 5 years from now is going to be one of the greatest challenges that the planet is dealing with. But I want you to walk. I want you to start crawling and start solving problems, getting good at solving problems, and then the big challenges, they're not that hard. It doesn't seem daunting to go off and address massive scale, global challenges that we have, because you're building confidence in your ability to get in and address problems and solve them.
Yeah, that is a really nice model. Yeah, that sounds just really cool to me. I honestly don't have too many questions at the moment. I guess if anything, like looking at the challenge, like trying to design something to help out with the pandemic, could you give like some examples of some of the challenges that you
Sure.
think you'd be interested in facing or tackling?
Yeah, and I know you got to run, but I'll give a couple of examples of stuff that we did during the pandemic. I mean, when all this stuff started, there's a couple of good videos out there as well. But when all this stuff started, myself and a handful of others kind of pulled together. Actually, my phone wouldn't stop ringing off the hook. I had everyone in there, and my grandma even sending me messages saying, "Hey, you see this over here? People are using 3D printers to make face shields." And literally my grandma is sending me the link, and I could only ignore that stuff for so long, but before I finally just said, okay, I understand. I have tools, I have access, I have a network of people. Let me just invest in this stuff and get in myself. And so fairly quickly we ended up producing a couple 100,000 face shields. We pulled in 26 tons of plastic that we got donated from Coke that we converted into face shields. Now,
geez.
I think I've made like a total of one face shield directly myself with my own hands, but it's because all of my time went into coordinating everybody else. And so, we produced a bunch of face shields, but then we also tackled the challenge of face masks. We pulled in 15,000 yards of donated fabric to like two U-Haul trucks full of fabric that we had to pull in and sort and filter and cut and launder and sanitize and cut up. But some of the the things that we did there is not that we made a face mask, because that's a relatively easy thing to make, but we made all the infrastructure to produce face masks at large scale. So we used all of our CNC machines to make these giant table jigs that allow us to cut up all of the fabric, so we could stack up 30 layers of fabric at a time on top of the jig, use these fancy cutters with a little shoe on it that keeps it in these tracks, and we're able to cut and process stuff for like 3,000 face masks in 8 hours. They had to get sewn up and turned into actual masks by other people, but we also set up a network of 150 people at home with sewing machines and a network of drivers to deliver the stuff to and from, all sanitized, all these issues that we had to, every day it was like putting out 3 fires. And then when we started pivoting, looking at stuff for small businesses as they're reopening. So we had some excess plastic. We're coming up with cheap and easy ways to do these things, because there's companies that are selling these products now, these sneeze guards and other things like that, but it's $200. Well, what we did is we've applied our brain to that and says, how can we do it for $2? How can we take that thing that's really expensive that we shouldn't be charging the small businesses $200 in the first place, because they've lost plenty of business already, and how do we actually take that down and make it as cheap as possible? But we've all, we looked at tons of different innovations around face masks, around making them more comfortable, around these, it's called ear savers, little straps that go behind it that you would laser cut, refining the process for making the visors for the face shield in the first place. So I think I would like to encourage you to get away from PPE specifically and really try to like ponder on a problem. Let's look around and see new problems that the pandemic has created. And now let's be very innovative in our thinking while staring at those problems.
So
yeah.
Complete your thought. Well, I mean, I think we're going in the same direction, which is good. So let's look at that deeper now. Okay. Mm-hmm. So this is a good transition point. Not just because Eric has to roll, but this is actually a good point just to kind of go into it. And Bernie, please line up your questions as you kind of have it as well. So Ideal Builder Labs, right, is your organization where you set up fab labs for people. Generally, right. That's the business, right? And you've set up a series of fab labs across different jurisdictions in the area. I'll even go to the extent of actually sharing my screen to show you the Matterport, because I just think Matterport's so cool. So this is the College of Alameda Fab Lab that Danny has built. So if you go in here, you can zoom in and a little tour. So we can provide that as a resource in the program, so you can take a little browse of what resource you got going on. You can take a little look at the CNC cutter, which is, this is beautiful. I love Matterport. Anyways, so you can take a look at that. So ID Build Labs builds these fab labs, right, that build capacity for the students in jurisdictions to understand on an education level how to use digital fabrication tools, right? And then you started Fab City Bay Area or Fab City Oakland, right, to start, and this is before the pandemic, from my understanding, right? You started Fab City Oakland before the pandemic, and wanting to build local distributed manufacturing capacities, right, or manufacturing capacities in general, that use a variety of tools in communities and cities, so that local communities have the resilience, given the era of manufacturing overseas being a thing, right? And then locally trying to get our local infrastructure to have enough tools to get there, right? So it's a long way of saying you want to build capacity for manufacturing locally, right? And that's why you started Fab City Oakland, and then Fab City Bay Area eventually, and then the pandemic happened, right? And then you started getting calls from your grandma, and you know, people, you know, needing PPE resources, and that's when Fab City Oakland and Fab City Bay Area really had to be put to its test to some extent, right? It's like, okay, well, since there's a huge demand now, how do we start assembling and mobilizing a network of people who, of fab labs, of micro fab labs, of a sewing machine on your tabletop of your house, you know, to hands that are available, whatever, to build up a capacity to build hundreds of thousands of face masks, right? And so, okay, so tell us about that now, right? Like,
yeah,
and we'll get to the project, right? Because the project, I think, dovetail from this now is that you have a need, and we want to have local capacity for manufacturing to solve that need, to build a solution in a cheap way that other people can do, right? And so how does that end project that we want students to build right now, how does that support the infrastructure you're looking to assemble? And how would you, you know, I guess give us the definition of the official mission, right, of Fab City Bay Area, and how that gets created.
Fab City is something that grew out of the Fab Lab network, this international network around the world, in Barcelona in 2014, I think. They set an initial goal, and they got the government of Barcelona to adopt the goal of becoming a city that produces everything that it consumes. And they gave themselves a 40-year timeline to achieve that mission. And this is an extremely audacious goal. Like, there's nobody else out there that is talking about that level of localization. There's nobody. No, you know, localizing one product is extremely difficult, let alone everything. And we're talking all of our food, all your electricity, all of your shoes, all your clothes, all your consumer goods, all your electronics, all your everything. But the way you get there is by not doing things the way you've done it in the past. It's completely reinventing the way that things are done, which, you know, and I've been kind of reinventing our you know, workforce development pipeline. That's been a thing that I've been somewhat effective at reinventing. But it's taking that same knowledge and putting that across industries and across products. And so, like, a great example that I've been laying out as what I envision as an ideal thing is looking at clothing and textiles. Because textiles, most people don't understand this, but textiles is one of the most polluting products on the planet. The amount of water and toxicity that goes into the dyes and the treatments and the bleaching and all that stuff, it actually dumps more pollution in the water than most of the things we consume through your clothes. And so if there are ways you can reinvent that system, now you know, then you can address a lot of our pollution issues with kind of reinventing that. And the thing is when you solve one of these challenges, when you can address this here, you're creating something that you can scale in every city across the world. So the potential for impact is exponential. It's not just a one-off, because you figure out how to do it here in this localized system, you can repeat that in other localized systems. And then you eliminate all the transportation that happens in between all those cities, which is what people should be looking at. But so looking at textiles, and for instance, trying to identify ways in which we can ways in which we can identify different types of textiles that we could produce locally, whether it be growing hemp and converting that into textiles, or there's a great company in Emeryville called Bolt Threads that has come up with a synthetic silk that they're able to grow. They can grow the silk by simulating spider silk. They come up with a way to actually grow that, but they're also using mushrooms to make leather. So they're setting up a massive mushroom farm, and they've come up with a way to convert that into a leather that's entirely plant-based. And people may not know, but when you're using mushrooms, especially if you throw mushrooms in an area that's polluted, it's mitigating the soil. So it's actually cleaning things up. That raw material now is cleaning things up. You're able to then convert that into a textile-like material that you can then turn into other products. And you can do all this in a closed loop cycle in your backyard. And when you're done, you throw it in the compost pile. And it's that level of kind of circular planning that we're looking at to create a Fab City. Except for that one example with making some leather local is one example of millions that need to be addressed. And so it's taking that idea and then looking around and saying, well, where do we get our phones from? That's a complicated one to solve and manufacture in your backyard, but it can be done. It just, does the technology currently exist? Does it exist in some other place on the planet that we just need to localize it and bring a version of it here? Do you need new material science to get embedded there? And then how do we incentivize material science getting, evolving in the directions we want it to go? But it's really just start looking around at anything. Like, okay, let's play this game and say, okay, everything I see needs to be made locally. How do we have to reinvent the way that gets made? And are we making new machines, new processes, new materials, or are we just sourcing it from a waste stream to begin with? And then having traditional manufacturing machines set up to process that waste stream and turn it into final product. We don't know. There are easier ways to deal with it, and there are much more complicated ways to deal with it. And some things will be easier, and other things will be a lot more complicated.
Yeah. So this is really helpful and structured, and maybe what we're doing. So first of all, Fab City, producing everything that we consume in our communities, right? That's the mission. And then looking at the circular kind of economy system that you're talking about of producing, consuming, and thinking about things differently in a decentralized format, perhaps, as an idea, or maybe a mixture of centralized and decentralized, and regions collaborating together, everyone having maybe, say, Leandro's, the mushroom farm, and then, exactly. You got this one. So we can look at different ways to do that. And then you're now talking about, okay, playing the process game of trying to identify opportunities and problems, is this Pete's Cup coffee manufactured here? I'm not really sure, but someone knows pottery somewhere, right? And it's starting to come through the process. So maybe what the project is, right? And right now we have a project. It's make something useful for local pandemic recovery. That's non-PPE, I would say, right? To build local capacity, right? To manufacture this kind of product. So maybe what it is exactly that, right? People are identifying objects in their local community that could be manufactured in a local basis, but perhaps with the relevance of the pandemic right now, right, as a driver, right, of things that we can identify now that we need right now, right, to build community resilience. And that becomes the project. And that within itself as a meme, right, an archaeological meme, essentially allows the capacity building, right, for the communities to then build up the capacity one step at a time to have that local manufacturing capability.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I'm down to support students and interests, and my job is to serve as a mentor more than anything else, and not try to get everyone to drink my Kool-Aid, though I think it tastes pretty good. But it's really just to be an effective mentor and support what other people are looking at. But I want you to know that it doesn't have to be a physical good, because a lot of the initial research that I had to do with Fab City is I had to identify a clear way that'd be possible to localize textile manufacturing. I just used that as an example, and I went off and I did a bunch of research, and I found a company in the Netherlands that uses CO2 as a fuel source to dye fabric that uses no water. I found another company that came up with a way of recycling plastic back to base chemical. And so once it's back to base chemical, it is essentially virgin grade material again, and can be completely converted into a new material. And they're looking at textile production with a lot of that. And so in this idea of reinventing a textiles manufacturing industry, I had to do a ton of research and go find the best practices. And really, at the end of the day, is to go find what exists, lay it out on a map, and then fill it in on a timeline, and then identify where the gaps are in that knowledge, and then say, okay, here's where more knowledge we need to invest. We need some more material science to come in here. We need better raw material supply source over here. We need good distribution over here. But we have this technology in Denmark we can bring in. We have this other technology from Zimbabwe we can bring in. We have this other technology in here, and that can build half of our pipeline. So even just doing the research to look into, like, let's grab a sector of an industry and say, like, if we're going to reinvent this, let's go find the best of the way it's done in other places, and then put that information together. And that serves as a valuable resource. It makes you a content expert, makes you more of an expert in that area that most people aren't really exploring, which is a valuable differentiator for yourself. But and this is just to highlight that there are different ways of looking at this. Yes, we can make a product, we can make a widget, but you can also just put in meaningful research into evolving an idea.
Yes. All right. So when it comes to scoping, because when it comes to students, they need particular parameters, particular specifications, particular scoping, so that it doesn't get too big of an idea, right, where they are paralyzed in even starting, right? So when it comes to the relevancy of today, perhaps what we're scoping it at to be is a non-PPE based. It's a pandemic recovery product that's cheap and useful for people to build and make on their own, but it's non-PPE based, perhaps, to start. Right?
And I would just leave the door open to product or service.
Okay.
Because there are ways you can reinvent a service that is not a tangible physical thing, but a lot of this comes through discovery, and so yes, I don't want to put too many ideas in your head that there's nothing you can grab onto, because there's just too much going on. But I do think it's a bit of a conversation. It's like, go off and identify ways in which our society has changed because of the pandemic, and things that we think are actually here to stay. Now, with that understanding of this is the way the world is going to be, now we can dig into those problems and say, well, then if this is a real problem, then maybe we need a widget that does this, or maybe we need a better process that does this. Maybe there's a service provider that can do this for you now. But it should definitely be more of a discovery. And so the early on is brainstorming. It's like, bring your ideas, bring your challenges, bring your problems that you see, work with other people. Maybe it's best to work on things collaboratively, where there's two people working on one product or one idea, but it's putting the problems on the table, having open conversations about it, and then identifying the best step after that. Because for myself, like, what the first idea I have is never the best. And my ideas always get better when I discuss them with other people, because I learn holes in my thinking. I learn I learn knowledge that I didn't actually have in the beginning. I realize that a product already exists. Someone's like, oh yeah, you can buy it on Amazon for $4. Like that. By sharing the knowledge and sharing the ideas, we get a lot smarter about that. So I really advocate that the first few sessions are brainstorming and bringing the problems to the table and trying to explore through that to really identify the right things to focus on.
Right. And in our format of our program, students, we're scoping out the project now, giving them content and resources to look at, to give them ideas. And between the school, during the school year, they're building out, they're taking their best stab at what that product or service or process is, right? And they're prototyping it to some extent. And then you're evaluating from there to then further execute with them, or have them execute themselves, and you're advising and mentoring and providing resource for them to execute on that further during the summer, right? So there may not be a complete process that we can build in the school year part, right? But at least we're producing content like this, right? During the podcast, to be able to kind of give them definition of exactly what it is, right? So what we're talking about here is a product or service or process, right?
Yep.
That can be manufactured or created or developed or produced locally, right? that be able to start to bring the capacity of creating things that you're consuming to be produced locally. That's what it comes down to eventually. And you can use Fab Labs for that. You can use tools that you have at your home for that. You can use resources that you have in your home or your neighborhood for that. You can go to your school for that. You can go anywhere that you can locally or regionally even, where you can access something to develop or create it. I mean, you don't have to go anywhere. I mean, it's a computer, right? It's a media project. It's a service-based project. It's something that's maybe it's an application that's technically made too, right? So it's the whole gamut, right? Great. And is the parameter of it being cheap and useful a good place to start, so that way other people can do the same thing and DIY it, you know?
Yeah, I think that's necessary, or at least the prototyping should be something that is cheap and convenient. Because if we take on reinventing the textile industry, that's hundreds of millions of dollars that's required at the end of the day to really implement that. But yeah, you should be looking at something that is relatively affordable for other people to acquire. That you're going to have a solution that is going to impact lots of people, and affordability is probably one of the main drivers for that.
Great. So I sorry, I wanted to get to that point, you know, so that the definition of everything is then developed now. So I'd like to open it up now. And Bernie, thanks for patiently waiting. You probably had, graveyard shift last night, and you're probably just like, I need to sleep, But what are you pondering over there? What's on top of your mind? Beehide?
Okay. Well, I don't really have as much as I have, like, I don't know. I listened. I'm actually on my weekend right now, so it didn't work last night, but I'm kind of tired, but it was intriguing enough to keep me awake. I do like how I see, I thought of so much. Like it's so many thoughts overriding now. It's kind of like all mush now.
Yeah, totally hear you.
But I don't know. I just like how you're like literally, or I guess one question I would have is, do you think that like anybody's capable? Like how likely is it that if someone comes in with an idea, you'd be able to actually help them patent it and create it? And another question is, say someone does come up with something. I see how you have here sharing instructions and stuff. How would that be shared? Would it just be would you privately give it to other people? Would it be displayed for, everybody to come see and, create it yourself? Or, what else am I trying to say?
Yeah, let me characterize what you just said, okay? Because that is definitely a big part. So what we're talking about is there a library of resources that these fab cities eventually have that local communities can access to create their own PPE, to create their own non-PPE items? What is the library? So I just wanted to give you an assist there.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, well, and just kind of addressing your first question there of, essentially, can anybody walk in and begin to realize their idea? When we had normalcy and when our doors were open to the Fab Labs, that's what we encouraged on a daily basis. Someone comes in and says, "Hey, I got this idea," and a lot of times that would come after they came to the Fab Lab and realized that there are things there were tools they had access to. But yeah, some things are some things are going to be restricted to paper and a computer because the idea is too big or too expensive to satisfy now. But it doesn't mean you can't make meaningful progress on it. But yeah, I mean, usually like the first step that we encourage anybody in the Fab Labs is like, cool, you have this idea, you want to make this thing. It's about this big. To me, it sounds like you're going to want to use a laser cutter. So, one of your first steps is learn how to use a laser cutter. And then you have access to a new tool that then gives you the power to begin to physically create the product. And so, but yeah, that's typically the process is really help people break the idea down and help them take the next step, because making your product is 10,000 steps. And until you realize what step 1 through 10 are, you're not going to ever get through 10,000 of them. So that's a lot of what, if you don't have the knowledge of how things are made, which most people don't, then that's advice like myself or other staff members and things like that. We will come in and we give you the advice and says, I see what it is you're trying to make. let's first think about it in this way. Let's maybe think about it in that way. And then, yes, you're going to need to learn to do some modeling. So let's get you loaded up on Fusion 360. You're going to need to learn how to use laser cutter. So let's take the workshop on laser cutting. And so, but yeah, and that's really what we're doing a lot of, is like helping people understand what's the first step. And it is, when you have an idea, especially something that you're passionate about, you know, if it's just something you thought like, I could sell 1 million of these things and I can make money, there's motivation there for sure. But if it's something that you're truly passionate about, if you're solving a problem, you know, if your best friend is wheelchair bound and you're coming up with a way to get him out of the wheelchair, like the passion behind that goal is going to be so strong that as soon as you get on track to the first step or the second step or the third step, after that, you're going to be off to the races, because the passion is what's driving you. And we're just trying to help you get the momentum.
Any follow-up question on that one?
Oh no, that was actually pretty good. I like how you're just like, yeah, just come in. You don't know anything, but if you're willing to learn, we can teach you. And you're not just gonna go straight to the moon instantly. You gotta take your baby steps. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're, you know, very consistently going to force you to do the work. You know, I've never really prided myself on being in what's called the job shop, where people show up and say, "Here's my order. Can you make this thing for me?" Like I'm looking to embed the opposite. I want people to realize what the tools are, how to use them, how to apply them, and really put that to work. So the goal is to tell you what the work is, and then lean back on you and say, now when you can go do some of the work, you can come back to me and check in and show me what you've done. But if you don't have enough motivation to go do the work on your own, then it's almost a waste of everybody's time. And then when it comes to like resources and sharing, like, and even this question of patents, like the way I've adopted and really embraced all of this work in the first place is, I'm not trying to lock anything down. I'm not trying to keep any secrets, because I want this knowledge out there. I want everyone to know how to use a laser cutter. I want everyone to know that, you know, to get the power to deal with your own problems. I want everyone to have confidence in tackling large challenges. And so it's all about sharing. And a patent may in fact be the best path for you and your product, but it is never always the answer. It is never going to be, that's what you need to do for every product you ever want to come up with. Because it may be something that's so beneficial to humanity that you want to throw it up on Thingiverse or present it at a global fab conference so that you can get it in the hands of tens of thousands of people all at once. And so you know, protecting your IP is one thing. You don't always need that to take a product to market, and it's not always the best solution for every product in the first place. So it's real, but my approach is very open-ended. You know, depending on how many people are involved, or if there's, you know, people who are interested in kind of watching over our shoulders, you know, get set up a small website or something like that is hosting people's projects that other people can learn from. But my goal is to help everyone learn, and your thought process, what's in your brain, if we can actually get that out of your brain, that's going to help someone else in their thought process and their learning. So my goal is to share the knowledge as much as possible, not keep it on lockdown.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, yeah, that was good. Let me think. I guess another question I just have is like, have you, how much success have you had with, like, besides PPE equipment and stuff? Like, would you say that people actually come here and they actually do take a lot from you? And, you know, have you seen great things come from your program? Or
Yeah, and I mean, the guy who stepped in to run the Laney College Lab, who was the first person behind me, he's now a production manager at a large shop, and his job is to run, you know, a shop with 40 employees. And he started working under me. Justin, who was another guy who worked directly for me, started as a student technician. He's now 3D printing houses. Everybody who runs the current college fab labs are former students. They didn't know they didn't know how to run a 3D printer before they stepped foot in the door, and now they're in charge of the shop. We've got multiple high school students that have used the fab labs pretty consistently at College of Alameda, and they're off, you know, pursuing engineering programs, and they're crediting the fab lab as a primary exposure. So we get lots of people. I tend to, every year I tend to kind of do a little bit more direct mentorship between 1 and 3 students. the majority of the people that I've done direct mentorship with have started their own businesses in the last 10 years. So there's a lot of success, but it's my job is to ignite the fire in you and to give you some assistance and point you in the right direction. And then tell you and instill in you that even though the challenges are unfathomable, or they're so great, that you can still get them, that you can still accomplish those challenges. That's my job, is to just be this mentor to help shuttle people forward, and help turn that, ignite the fire and give you access to the right people and content. But it's at the end of the day, it's about you driving it. Where I'm just here to, to support.
Yeah.
All right. So in summary, Fab City Bay Area, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's have students build solutions towards the mission of producing what they're consuming, to start building local capacity to produce everything that they're consuming, whether that's physical goods, whether that's digital goods, whether it's a process, it's a product, it's a service, right? And to rethink and recalibrate our understanding of consumption and prosuming and making, so that we're at a more optimized understanding, or more optimized efficiencies to kind of get to what we need to use, right, in society, right, while utilizing the relevancy of the pandemic, and the relevancy of peripheral items to the pandemic, perhaps, and then ultimately thinking about post-pandemic, products, services, processes that can be distributedly manufactured or created or developed.
Yeah, and on the pandemic side, like I think if you're looking at new problems that have arisen because of the pandemic that aren't going away, the market opportunity is pretty huge, because there's a new set of problems the vast majority of people in the world have never stared at before. And so like that, it's just that there's a large amount of opportunity that is embedded in those things. So looking at the things that have the highest impact, and that's really what I try to focus on, is looking at the highest impact work I can do. And so if I was in your shoes, I'd be looking at those things now, because there's great opportunity standing right in front of you that nobody knows how to deal with yet.
So adding to that parameter set, right? Because of the pandemic, there are new opportunities popping up to solve big problems, and you may want the students may want to prioritize, again, that huge relevancy that is presented today, right? So let's cap it with Mason's question. Would this project still be viable for students that's outside of the Bay Area? And you responded to this through text, but why don't you share that through verbal? Danny.
Yeah. So because the primary thing that I would love to give everyone here is access to the physical facilities is more restricted. A lot of what we're going to be doing is kind of virtual support, virtual design, etc. So it's not tied to here. It's not tied geographically to the Bay Area. It could be anywhere and anywhere. And there's, I can also plug you into the network of Fab Labs and throw you on, have you look at the map and show you where they exist in your backyard. So there's physical options that may exist in other locations, but the same challenges we're dealing with here are the same challenges they're dealing with in Detroit, the same challenges we're dealing with in Ohio, the same challenges we're dealing with in all these other places. So I don't see there being any large restrictions about geography.
So the answer is basically Fab City Bay Area has Bay Area in the title, but truly Fab City at the end of the day is a global organization that's interested in building Fab cities across the world, right? And it's just Fab City Bay Area is headed to be there to be a jurisdiction behind it. But it's also limited to if there was a student project that were to go through the process, right? They would have access to your network of Fab Labs potentially if they wanted to make something that you utilize a Fab Lab, essentially. Cool. So Danny, Bernie, thanks for joining, and Eric, wherever he is in class land, thanks for joining. And Danny will hold you back for a little bit, and Bernie, feel free to stick around. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for having me. See you guys later.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Bernie.